Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today we're going to be taking a look at what is called the early national period. This is really the testing ground for our new government, the constitutional government. And we go from basically 1789 to 1824. And this is going to be the most trying period because it's going to see if our republic can even last. So we're going to be looking at the presidencies of a couple of men. And here they are, starting with Washington, then John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and then James Monroe. These are the first 5 presidents in that order. And they are basically the guys who are going to get us on the track for being a solid country and being able to survive. Now, George Washington, we all know who he is. Now, he is the first president, served 2 terms from 1789 to 1797. He was the one who had the first true test of power under the Whiskey Rebellion, and on the next slide we will get into what that was. And he is the guy who establishes the tradition of 2 terms for your presidency. And that is a tradition, not a law, for the next 150 years, basically until President Franklin Delano Roosevelt during World War II, who served, well, he got elected into a 4th term and died during that 4th term. It wasn't until after Franklin Roosevelt that a law was put in place that only has it as 2-term limit for the president. And after George Washington leaves office after his 2nd term is completed, he is going to, well, it's going to usher in a time of the first political parties, like true blue political parties, into the United States government over the issue of a national bank. Now, let's just go over the Whiskey Rebellion real quick. The basics are the federal government, the constitutional government, wants to put a tax on spirits. And spirits is basically the technical name for alcohol, like whiskey, vodka, rum, gin, things like that. Those are spirits. Now, this angered a lot of farmers, and that's because they would use some leftover crops like corn. You make corn whiskey, potatoes, you can make vodka, things like that. And so they would use leftover crops to make alcohol, and they were being taxed on making it now. So there's like, no, we don't want to do that. So they're going to protest. They're going to go into a rebellion, and Washington is going to lead a group of troops up to the area where this happened. I believe it was in New York, like upstate New York or Pennsylvania, somewhere in that area. And he's the only president to actually lead troops on the ground, like to like a crisis. And this event, which, him and his troops, they get rid of the rebellion, like all the farmers are going back to their homes, and just, they stop. And this proves that the new government is capable of responding to civil unrest and gaining control of the situation. Shows that there is power in the new government system. But once, Washington leaves, we're going to see the development of the first political parties. And these political parties are, we have the Federalists and we have the Democratic Republicans. All right. Now, a couple of issues early on that we see them clashing over. Of course, the National Bank, then we have something called Jay's Treaty, and then we have the undeclared war on France. So let's look at these 3 issues real quick. The National Bank, the goal is to have a national bank to help the government with managing the money and helping run the economy. And the Federalists are going to support this because it seemed like the right thing to do for a national government. And the Democratic Republicans, they oppose it because they saw it as a way just to only benefit the rich and just to have more and more power in a centralized government, which basically, if you remember the anti-federalists, the ones who were against the Constitution being adopted, they basically just relabeled themselves as the Democratic Republicans. So they're not for big government, they want small government. Right. Next event, we have Jay's Treaty. This is from John Jay, a lawyer who was one of our founding fathers, and he is going to negotiate with the British in a dispute over their presence west of the Appalachian Mountains in territory that's technically ours. Now, the Federalists, they are going to support the idea that the British agree to, like, for the military to leave the area, but permitting their people of business, their traders, their merchants to stay and do business. The Democratic Republicans, they want all of the British just gone, no longer in the area, don't even have to worry about them because they're not there. So they're clashing over all these ideas, right? Then we have the undeclared war on France. Now, this is under John Adams' presidency, second president. He opposed France, and we have what's called the XYZ affair, where basically there's some spying and like extortion type stuff going on. And basically what happens is the Federalists, they start to oppose France and wanted to go to war with France and have an alliance with the British against France. It's funny how, things swap around like that, right? But then the Democratic Republicans, they actually want to have a better, stronger trade partnership and alliance with France, and basically just sweep the weirdness of the XYZ affair under the rug and just go about their day. All right. Now, let's get into this a little bit more. The Federalists, they're led by John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was a very influential guy when it comes to, the foundation of the country. If you've ever seen the musical Hamilton, you know what I'm talking about. That is actually quite accurate, that way that musical portrays the events. Now, Hamilton wants a national bank so that we have a strong economy. He's what you would call a loose constructionist, which is basically someone who follows the Constitution, but maybe bends the rules a little bit, doesn't follow it exactly word for word, kind of be like, well, it's implying that we can do this, so that gives us the right to do it. So it doesn't specifically say we can have a national bank, but it says that we can have a strong economy. Having a national bank is how we get a strong economy. That's his justification behind it. Now, he would gain the support of bankers, businessmen, the tradesmen, merchants, all the people like that, which are mostly figure from like Delaware on up through New England. So the North. All right. Then we have the Democratic Republicans, who are led by Thomas Jefferson. So he's basically got the Southerners. They're going to oppose a national bank because they thought that it would concentrate too much power and that it was like not exactly following the Constitution. He was a strict constructionist, meaning that you followed the Constitution to the letter and you don't vary away from it at all. And they believe in weak national government and an agricultural economy. So like more along the lines of states' rights. States should have more governing abilities than the federal government. Now, the election of 1800 is one of the most important elections in our country's history. It was a very close election, but Thomas Jefferson is going to win over John Adams, and it is the first time that we have a peaceful transfer of power between political parties. And it is basically the event that solidifies and makes permanent the idea of political parties being in the American government. Now, talk about the government part a little bit. Let's talk about what else is happening between 1789 and 1824. And that is expansion into the western territories of North America and some of the wars that happened as a consequence. So, very important one under Thomas Jefferson, 1803, his third year in office as president, he is going to do the Louisiana Purchase. This is a territory that he buys from France, nearly doubling the size of the United States for $15 million. That's actually a really low price on all that land. And we got it from Napoleon Bonaparte, who is in need of a lot of money because he's fighting all of his wars over in Europe. So he's like, hey, I'm not doing anything with Louisiana over in North America. I don't want it. I don't need the hassle. You guys want it? I'll give you a good deal on it. So yeah, we took the deal. But Jefferson, of course, he's going to question the purchase because he's a strict constructionist. So is it constitutional for him to buy all this territory? Because it's not specifically laid out that the president has purchasing power of that type. But he finds a loophole that he needs and is like, yes, I can do it. So he does. And now we have from the East Coast, the Atlantic coast, all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and it wedges down to New Orleans, which is a very important port city in the South. And this is going to completely open the door. We now can start sending people all over this territory for settling and like solidifying our control. But in order to know what's even out there, Thomas Jefferson, the president, is going to authorize the Lewis and Clark expedition, where they're going to gather scientific information of the Louisiana Territory, as well as finding, hopefully, a river route to get to the Pacific Ocean. They're going to be accompanied by Sacagawea, who was a Native American woman, or a first American woman, who was their guide and translator throughout a large, for the whole trip, and she was especially useful for like the bulk of the journey when she interacted with people that she knew the languages of. She knew multiple languages, so she was like critical to being successful on this journey. Now, first war that we're really going to talk about is the War of 1812. So let's look at some of the causes for the War of 1812. Now, America is going to end up fighting the British again. And we have these people called war hawks who sought to gain control of parts of Canada, and then British impressment of sailors, and an end to British agitation of Native Americans in the West. Now, British interference with American shipping and westward expansion would fuel the declaration of war here. Now, to explain some of this a little bit, Warhawks, they are young militant congressmen of the Democratic Republican Party. They want a war. Like, they're like, I'm big and bad. I can do this. Let me do this. I'm going to do this no matter what you say. Impressment is when the British Navy would capture American ships, and they would make the sailors of those ships, like, force them into sailing for the British Navy, kind of like slavery of Americans who are sailors. All right, and the political cartoon that we're seeing basically is showing how the British would basically pay Native Americans to harass and attack and kill Americans who are trying to settle in the West. So all these things are basically just building up tensions more and more and more until it's going to erupt into fighting. And it really erupts on June 1st, 1813, when we have basically a British ship and an American ship, and they just go at it, though our ship gets captured, the Chesapeake. Right? Now, an ally of the British is going to be Tecumseh, who is a Native American war chief, and he's going to unite a bunch of tribes in the Canada-US border area. And yeah, it's going to lead to a lot of craziness. So November 7th, 1811. So all this stuff is happening all around the same time. Governor William Henry Harrison, a future president, uh, is going to defeat the Shawnee warriors, which is Tecumseh's people, the Shawnee, at this one particular battle. And this is where we learn that the British are supplying natives with guns. So it's like, okay, they're trying to stir up some trouble for us, try and weaken us so that they can come sweeping back in. We can't let that happen. Now, James Madison is the president during this time, and the War of 1812 does get the nickname Mr. Madison's War. Now, because we have a shaky start to the fighting for both the US and the British, because like neither one of us was really ready for the fight when it broke out. Now, the war happened in four theaters or four main areas: the Atlantic Ocean, the Great Lakes and Canadian frontier area, along the coast of the United States, and in the southern states like the deep south, like Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. Now, getting into it, the Atlantic Ocean, basically our ships are just fighting any chance that they come across each other and just blowing the snot out of each other. Though a lot of the earlier naval battles would end with us winning, the US, because we had bigger, more powerful guns on our ships, and the Royal Navy was spread a little too thin. They had too much stuff going on around the world, so they had too few ships to do too many jobs. All right, the Great Lakes area. Basically, naval fighting on the Great Lakes. We are basically going to outlast the British, and they give up. In the Canadian frontier, this is a lot of like Americans fighting against the native tribes, and we are going to outnumber them in this area, and we're going to basically crush the alliance between the British and the Native Americans, such as like the event where we kill the chief Tecumseh in battle. So that's going to completely cripple the native tribes and their ability to wage a war, to where it's only the British left and they don't last much longer after that. Now, while we're doing well in the Canadian frontier, the Great Lakes, and the Atlantic, we're not doing so good on the coast, because the British are going to form a blockade on the coast, such as places like the Chesapeake Bay, and they're going to completely whip the American militias, so like the troops that are aligned against them, to try and prevent them from getting into Washington, D.C. The British break through and they burn D.C., including the White House and the Capitol building, to the ground. And President Madison has to flee to Virginia, and this is like the lowest point during the war. So the Capitol gets burned. The White House is basically just a hollowed out shell. Everything's been destroyed. Here's a little depiction of it now. This right here, Dolly Madison, this is President James Madison's wife. She saves this portrait, which is one of the more famous portraits of George Washington. Basically, as the British are marching up the road to get to the White House, she takes a kitchen knife, like one of those big like chef's knives, and she cuts this painting out of the frame and rolls it up and basically runs out into the night with it while they're escaping. Otherwise, this painting would have been lost to the fire. Now, the city of Baltimore was under siege by the British Navy and at Fort McHenry. So we're going to see some craziness happening here. Our troops are able to defend Fort McHenry, and British troops are going to end up withdrawing from the Chesapeake Bay because of how strong of a fight we put up here. The ships of the British were bombarding this fort, trying to beat them into submission, but it didn't work. They had this humongous flag, like one of the biggest flags that you would have ever seen at that time, and they would raise it up every day and be like, here we are, come and get us. And it's that is going to inspire Francis Scott Key to write a poem that would then be set to music that would become the Star Spangled Banner, the national anthem of the country. All right, the southern states, we're going to see Andrew Jackson, who's a future president as well, really come into his own. He's known for being a Indian fighter. Like, he battled a lot of Native American uprisings, trying to basically take land in the South and hold on to it more than like fighting against the Native American British alliance. So we're kind of just expanding during the war as well. Now, the Battle of New Orleans, on the other hand, the British Navy is going to break through at the mouth of the Mississippi River. They're going to start like moving to attack the city of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson is going to set up a defensive line around the city, and he is going to like go to battle against the British here. Minimal losses, forcing the British back. He basically has them bottlenecked coming up a hill to his defensive wall, and they just blast the heck out of him. All right. So the British, they never even really reach the walls, and they have to retreat. So it's a U.S. victory, hands down, no questions about it. The only problem is, about 2 weeks earlier, the war had officially come to an end. They just had not received word yet. So an armistice is in place. There's no more fighting, but 2 weeks later, because they hadn't heard the news yet, the Battle of New Orleans happens and makes Andrew Jackson a national hero. Now, was the war worth it? The War of 1812. That's kind of a hit or miss. So 1850 treaty reopened trade without fear of impressment. So our sailors are safe now on the open waters, at least from the British. All right. We have now a treaty that limits the warships on the Great Lakes. So there's less chance of fighting breaking out between ships in the Great Lakes between America and the British Canadians. And the northern boundary of the Louisiana Territory is solidified, and we have an agreement with the British that we will have a joint occupation of the Oregon Territory. So the American Northwest now, like where Oregon and Washington are, we're going to share that with the British, at least for 10 years. All right, moving forward a little bit. We talked about James Monroe earlier as one of our 5 first presidents. This is what he is known for here. Now, we get the Monroe Doctrine from him. The Americas are basically off bounds for the Europe. If they already have a colony in the Americas, they can keep it, but no new colonies are to be established in the Americas by Europeans, and they're not allowed to reclaim any lost colonies in the Americas. Because if they do, the US would take that as a threat to our peace and safety, and we will go to war against that European country for trying to interfere in American, North and South American like life. And in return, we'll not interfere with what's going on in Europe. You guys do what you're going to do, stay over there to do it, and we'll stay over here and do our thing. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about the westward movement that is going on, because we've acquired all this territory. We've got the area from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River, and now we've got the Louisiana territory that goes from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. So let's talk about people moving out that way. Now, economics is the big reason why people are moving out west. All right. And we're going to see a huge expansion of immigration during this time, economic growth, industrialization, So we're going to see this idea that's called manifest destiny, where it's like the idea that we're going to be destined to control the continent from one ocean to the other, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. One of the inventions that's going to help fuel expansion westward is the cotton gin, which was invented by Eli Whitney. It's going to help expand slavery in the South and the development of what's called the Cotton Kingdom. Basically, cotton is now going to be from like the Carolinas, Georgia, all the way out west to even like parts of Texas. That's a lot of territory. There's going to be a lot of cotton being produced. They're going to need a lot of slave labor to take care of picking the cotton and processing it for trade. And what this machine does, it is a much faster way of processing the cotton by picking the seeds out. It mechanically does it, and you get the, just the material that you need for sale to send wherever you're going to trade it to, and it can be processed into cloth. So this is going to fuel the idea of, all right, should slavery be allowed in new Western territories? It comes from this. And that is a huge argument over the following like 30, 40 years in American history. That leads all the way up to the Civil War. All right, railroads and canals are going to be developed during this time. And we're going to see an industrial economy that's going to be produced during this. And it's all going to help the westward movement. Right. Locomotives, steamships are all going to speed up the travel going out west and going up the rivers, all of it. Now, manifest destiny, we talked about that a little bit already. So now we're going to start seeing some more examples of it. Now, let's talk a little bit about Texas. Now, Americans are going to migrate or move to Texas, which at this time in the 1830s and earlier is owned by Mexico. They're going to, the Americans that have moved to Texas, now call themselves Texans, they're going to revolt against the Mexican government for their right to be independent. Texas is going to win their independence in 1836. Because of battles like the Alamo, they're going to have heroes like Davy Crockett, Sam Houston, all of that. But they're only going to be independent for about 9 years until the United States is going to annex them, which is basically a hostile takeover for anybody who knows business. And yeah, that's how we get Texas. It's basically a takeover. You're going to be ours now or else. All right. Now, we were sharing Oregon with the British since the end of the War of 1812. That's like 1814, we signed that agreement. President James K. Polk wanted all of Oregon for the US. We threatened war on the British if they didn't give it to us. They offered to split the territory evenly. We are going to accept that offer. So basically what we have now for like Washington and Oregon, that's what we got from the British, well, and Idaho. That's what we got from the British, and we wound up not going to war. They kept their part, which became part of Canada. All right, the late 1840s, we go to war against Mexico, and we're going to see this big opportunity to gain territory here. So President James K. Polk, once again, offers to purchase territory from Mexico. This is going to be like New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Colorado. Mexico is going to refuse. So what's President Polk going to do? He's going to basically agitate or infuriate Mexico enough to where they're going to attack us, and we get to play the game of, oh, we were just defending ourselves, and war is now officially declared between Mexico and the United States. This is a war that basically all the major players of the Civil War, like generals and whatnot, like Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Stonewall Jackson, all these guys, they get their first taste of warfare during the Mexican-American War. And they will take those skills and use them when they're leading troops on the battlefield during the American Civil War, which is about 15 years away. All right. Now, Mexican-American War, we win that, and we acquire lots of territory, including like Colorado and Utah, Nevada, most of Arizona and New Mexico. All right. And next, we're going to also have a session, which is basically going to get us even more territory, where we're going to just take over management of other territories like California and the southern part of Arizona and New Mexico. Now, what is the impact on the first Americans? Let's see. Well, the first big event is like the Trail of Tears, which was back during Andrew Jackson's presidency, which is like the 1820s, 1830s, and where the Cherokee Nation is forced to leave Georgia and relocate out to Oklahoma, so halfway across the continent. Even though the Supreme Court is going to say you can't do this, President Jackson is going to do it anyway. And westward migration of white settlers is going to, we're increasingly going to have altercations with Native Americans who are repeatedly going to be defeated because there's just too many white settlers and soldiers moving out west, so that people are being forced off their homelands, put onto reservations where they're basically not allowed to leave, and if they do leave, they're considered hostiles and can be hunted down and killed. Yeah. And the only thing that really interrupts this from happening, westward expansion, fighting against Native Americans, is when the Civil War breaks out. All right. That's where we're going to end today. When we come back next time, we're going to be taking a look at the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Come back for that one, guys, because it is a good one.